Hello and welcome. I'd like your full attention while I briefly go through some safety concerns in this short workplace safety presentation. There are 3 key steps towards safety in the workplace: identifying the risk, assessing the risk, controlling the risk and reviewing its effectiveness. Put simply, the best way to prevent injuries or illness is to find potential hazards and fix them. Please take the next few moments to consider the following key procedures. Wherever possible, eliminate the risk. Simply remove the hazard completely. Substitute the hazard. Substitute or replace the hazard with a piece of equipment or work practice that negates risk. Isolate. Isolate the hazard or hazardous work practice. Engineering controls. Adapt tools or equipment to minimise the risk. Administrative controls. Change work practices or implement more training. And of course, make sure personal protective equipment is worn when required. Safety is an ongoing practice. Just because it's safe today doesn't mean it's safe tomorrow. The hazards presented by chemicals can vary. High toxicity, flammability, continuous exposure, or through unseen vapours or skin contact. Unseen vapours or chemical contact with skin can be harmful and need to be considered all the time. Relatively harmless chemicals are often overlooked, and it can be the continuous exposure that becomes the hazard. Being familiar with the chemicals that you're working with is vital. Always read and understand the labels before use.
As part of the hair and beauty industry, we are constantly exposed to a range of chemicals, and employers and employees need to be aware of this exposure and need to deal with this on a regular basis to make sure that the exposure is reduced to a minimum. The accumulative effect of working with chemicals on a daily basis needs to be something that's brought to the attention of employers and employees. These products can cause extreme reactions in the workers, such as asthma, extreme dermatitis, even cancer can be a result of working with these chemicals. In the hair and beauty industry in South Australia, we've developed a document to assist workers and employers to have a better understanding of the chemicals that they're working with and the conditions that they should provide to protect the safety of their staff.
Chemicals can pose a range of health and safety problems in workplaces. Even chemicals which you think are fairly safe can be a problem if used in large amounts, or for long periods of time, or if mixed with other chemicals.
Sometimes it's the working environment itself that can be hazardous. When chemicals can't be readily identified, they must be treated as hazardous. Chemicals plus heat is a particularly dangerous combination.
Working in the Metropolitan Fire Service is a hazardous occupation. Firefighters face many incidents which involve manufactured textiles and synthetics that these days can create hazards for firefighters when involved in fire. The products of combustion can constitute a major health risk for firefighters. Firefighters returning from a fire can carry contaminants on their clothing and return them into their work environment back at the fire station. In order to prevent this from happening, the fire service has introduced a dirty to clean fire station concept. In that way, firefighters returning from a fire can move from a designated dirty zone and decontaminate and move through to a clean area to ensure that no products of combustion that can cause a hazard to their health can move into that work environment.
In certain situations, like firefighting, we don't know what chemicals we're likely to encounter in these fires, so we need a very rigorous system for managing chemical hazards. Things like the right personal protection and also the right clean-up procedures are important.
Pictograms are an easy-to-understand method of identifying most types of chemical hazards, as are signal words, hazard statements and precautionary statements. In essence, always check before taking action.
In Veolia, we handle lots of different chemicals, ranging from the grease traps to the acids to the small hydrochloric acids which can burn straight through your bones, and small chemicals which come from your labs, your universities. With the acids, if something goes wrong with that, it could be a major accident happen and someone can be burnt or even death.
Remember, this means handling as well as storing chemicals. Fumes, vapours and spillages are as dangerous as contact.
My view on the workplace safety, I think my guys come to work, they're happy, they're healthy. If during the day, if they do their work, they stick by their risk assessments, JCAs, do it the way they've been trained, they'll go home nice and happy and come back the next day all safe and sound.
There are many aspects of chemical hazards in the workplace. You need to know what chemical you're using, what control measures are relevant for that particular chemical and process, in order to prevent health and safety problems in the short and the long term.
Even if you consider the chemicals you're working with to be low risk, please ensure you read any chemical safety data sheets. It's a legal requirement to keep a hazardous chemical register, safety data sheets, labels, placarding, fire protection and equipment. All workplace hazardous chemicals need to be classified according to the globally harmonised system of classification and labelling of chemicals, GHS. Be aware and be safe.
A few months ago here at our Council Leisure Centre, we had an explosion. The explosion was due to the fact that a contractor who supplies us with our mixing buckets didn't wash the bucket out prior to giving it to us. So when we mixed chemicals in the bucket, a reaction occurred, causing the explosion. Luckily, there were no injuries, but by making a few small changes after applying the hierarchy of controls to our chemical handling process, we've been able to make sure that that never happens again.
Chemicals are essential in many of our everyday work and manufacturing processes. If they are not managed effectively, chemicals can impact on the health and safety of workers, the general public and the environment. Businesses are required to minimise risks to health and safety by applying the hierarchy of controls. This is a ranking of control measures used to protect workers from risks to health and safety. We need to choose controls based on this ranking and whether they are practical for the job or task. In practice, using a combination of controls often brings the best results. We also need to manage any hazardous products and byproducts of our processes. Workers must be provided with appropriate training in the risks of the chemicals they are using, how these risks are managed, and how to use controls. Level 1. Eliminate. The best way to eliminate the risks of a hazardous chemical is to avoid using it altogether.
A council in Victoria found that using a scraper to remove graffiti off glass was just as effective as using a chemical and safer for their employees.
However, we use chemicals for specific reasons, so this often isn't possible. But what we could do is eliminate a worker handling activity. For example, buying pre-mixed chemicals instead of hand mixing them. Level 2. Substitute, isolate or engineer. Where we can't eliminate a chemical from a work process, there are other approaches that we can use to minimise the risks. Substitution.
With advances in paint technology, I now find I can use water-based paints for so much more than I could before. And I feel so much better for it.
We can substitute a chemical with a less hazardous one, or use a chemical in a form that reduces the chances of exposure, like using a paste instead of a powder.
Using hot water instead of cold water to help remove graffiti can reduce the amount of chemicals required.
We need to remember that substitutions can introduce new risks which need to be managed. Isolate. Secondly, we can isolate processes from workers. For example, by fully enclosing or automating a process to avoid operator exposure. We can also separate incompatible chemicals. Chemicals can be separated by using barriers or distance. Information about a chemical's incompatibilities can be found in its safety data sheet. Engineering. Thirdly, we can use engineering controls, for example, bunding and ventilation systems. To make sure the controls are effective, we need to provide proper training and supervision for workers and maintain our equipment. The approaches we have just described are known as higher level controls and should always be considered first and used if possible. We will often need to supplement these with lower level controls. These are administrative actions and personal protective equipment. Examples of administrative actions that can be used are limiting access to areas containing hazardous chemicals and safety signs.
It is important to develop safe work procedures or standard operating procedures for your workers and provide training that is specific for the chemicals being used. Procedures should talk through the controls to be used and developed using safety data sheets and other relevant information.
Personal protective equipment. There are many different types of PPE, but we should only use what is appropriate for the job. Remember to review the safety data sheet when choosing PPE and not rely solely on it to protect workers. PPE is intended to be used to supplement other control measures and when there are no other practical alternatives, like in emergencies or managing spills. It is important to provide training in how to correctly use and wear PPE. So, in summary, we need to manage all health and safety risks of workplace chemicals using the hierarchy of controls. We should use higher level controls where possible and consider using a combination of controls for the greatest protection. To make sure our controls are effective, we need to ensure our engineering controls are maintained and provide appropriate training and supervision for workers. By remembering the different levels of hierarchy of controls, applying them and monitoring their effectiveness, we can minimise chemical health and safety risks in the workplace.
Everyone was excited for this family lunch, but no one knew their fish and chips would come with a side of poison and a trip to hospital. Well, everyone was excited for this family lunch, but no one knew their fish and chips would come with a side of poison and a trip to hospital.
Fish and chips. It's a meal nearly all of us have and enjoy. Some of us are partial to a bit of salt, others a slice of lemon. And then there are those that love a dash of vinegar. But beware, because vinegar isn't always what you think it is.
It was instant burn for her. It was horrific, her reaction.
At this point, I totally lost my voice.
I've put it on my tongue and my tongue is burning. It's like acid.
He then came running out and he said, hospital, straight away. You three, hospital, now.
It's happened again in a different restaurant, and you could be next. The vinegar that isn't vinegar, but a deadly poison.
Every second that went by, on a cellular level, it was burning away at my internal organs.
It was to be one of those lovely big family get-togethers at a wonderful seafood restaurant by the sea.
It was a really happy time because it's very rare for our whole family to be together.
Lauren had organised the family event at the Coast Bar and Restaurant, a place with a checkered history. But more on that a little later, because they're ordering lunch and Nan Sylvia loves her fish and chips. There she is.
My nan, my beautiful nan, she always loves to have vinegar on her fish and chips.
She was so hungry.
Poured the vinegar over her fish and chips.
That's Nikki, Sylvia's daughter. Anyway, down the other end of the table, grandparents Peter and Annie had ordered the fish and chips as well, and were about to tuck into their plate, also doused in vinegar, when drama started unfolding with Sylvia, who'd already started eating.
The fright and the scare on her face, because her mouth just immediately started burning straight away. She was like, oh, what is this? And she spat out. She started crying, the tears in her eyes.
These photos were taken hours later, but her mouth and lips immediately went red and blistered, with a scene developing A waiter rushes over.
So he brings out a new meal and he says, okay, free meal on us. And my nan is still crying, and so I'm going, what is this? And then by that time, you had dipped your finger in it?
Yeah, and as soon as it went on my tongue, it's like, oh my goodness, that can't be vinegar. Because immediately it's sort of numb, you know, tingly numb.
He has swallowed.
Meanwhile, Fran was sitting next to Annie and Peter, who'd missed the commotion at the other end of the table and now seemed in distress after they too had begun eating.
Are you guys okay? And they said, no, something's on this food. I've put it on my tongue and my tongue is burning. It's like acid.
And I said to Annie sitting beside me, there's something wrong with this.
And I thought, well, I'll just taste it. So I dabbed my finger in, unfortunately put it on my tongue and burnt the tongue.
And Peter, in the minutes after putting this in your mouth, what was going on with you physically?
Well, I suddenly got all this burning sensation in the throat. And as I said, my lips suddenly came up in blisters. And at that point, we realised there was something seriously happening here.
The family summoned wait staff to the table.
What have you given us? He goes back to the kitchen, he comes back. This time he's pouring us drinks and he goes, oh, it's alcoholic sanitizer. It's fine. So he lied.
The table is breaking out into chaos.
Something's going on over there, something's going on here.
The waiter rushes back to the kitchen.
He comes out again, and this time he goes, oh, I have to get you all to the hospital. Still not telling us what it was.
Panic sets in, and a family member forces his way into the kitchen.
And only then do we find out that it was oven grill cleaner.
Needing to tell the hospital what they've consumed, the family take photos that would make your toes curl and certainly your mouth burn. Not vinegar on their seafood, but toxic oven cleaner. It's a warning label plainly frightening, corrosive to metal, harmful if swallowed, causes severe burns, store locked up. It doesn't get much more hazardous, and they've put it all over their food. Staff load sick and injured customers into their own cars, and a convoy heads to nearby Gosford Hospital on the New South Wales Central Coast, leaving behind those who wisely chose not to have fish and chips.
That was the point of tears. I was so upset, along with my sister. My husband, my brother, we were all sort of left behind, not knowing what was going on.
Mum and I have gone up to the triage and she couldn't even say her name. She couldn't say her name because her tongue had swollen up and her lips. And she's looking at me with fear because it's like, I can't talk.
Well, I was burning in the throat. At this point, I totally lost my voice. I could not make a sound at all.
Now, if you think you've heard all this before, you're right. Yep, we uncovered a similar vinegar stuff-up on the Gold Coast.
This man almost killed me, has maimed me for the rest of my life.
Accidents happen, as tragic as they are, they happen.
This restaurant owner accidentally gave oven cleaner instead of vinegar to treat Amanda Merrifield's hiccup attack she was having at the table. This is how it left her.
I could hear all the conversations and I could hear the doctor saying, I doubt she'll make it 72 hours.
Amanda has endured 83 operations and had her stomach and esophagus removed. And now it's happened again in another restaurant in another state.
Is what cleared a popular restaurant. An employee was killed and nearly a dozen people had to go to the hospital.
So let's get right out to NBC 10's Jeff Saperstone live on that scene this morning in Burlington with the very latest. Jeff.
And LaToya, there's a big cleanup here overnight as they're trying to figure out exactly what happened here, but we are hearing from some people who were inside this restaurant at the time.
No, we were just sitting at the bar and kind of the smell of like ammonia and chlorine kind of came over us, and a bunch of people started coughing kind of, and looked around, and all of a sudden all the employees were kind of not around.
Yeah, quite a scary situation at the time. Here's what we know. 1 employee is dead. 10 others are recovering this morning. Firefighters say that employee was attempting to squeegee a cleaning product called Super 8 that had spilled. He was overcome. They say there was some sort of chemical reaction in the kitchen area, and the fumes were just overwhelming. That employee later died at the hospital. Hazmat teams going through the entire restaurant. Employees and customers among those who went to the hospital complaining of nausea, difficulty breathing, and burning in the eyes. Buffalo Wild Wings tells us they're in contact with the franchise owner. They're working through this as this investigation does continue. Unclear if this restaurant, by the way, will open today. For now, we're live in Burlington. I'm Jeff Saperstone, NBC 10 Boston.